the amendment offered by Mr. Whitman. So many as are in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
And you've been watching a portion of Wednesday's House Armed Services Committee markup of a Defense Department spending bill. Quick reminder that you can see this entire event online anytime at cspan.org. In a moment, we'll be live with the U.S. Senate as lawmakers will be gabbling in to wrap up their week. Immigration policy is on the agenda today. No votes are scheduled. It is expected that this debate will stretch into next week. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order, and the chaplain, retired Admiral Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer. Chaplain.
Let us pray. Eternal God, who sets boundaries for the sea to make it obey, your mercies are new every morning. Thank you for your faithfulness. You save us from distress, rescuing us from danger because of your great love. Lord, uphold our senators and renew their strength. Empower them to bravely face the challenges of our time. When they are bewildered, lead them with your grace. Give them the wisdom to prepare now for the difficult seasons before them. May they obey your teaching, striving to be guided by your words. And Lord, bless our Senate pages on this, their graduation day. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Yeah, thank you very much. Following my remarks, and perhaps Senator McConnell, if he wishes to speak, the Senate will resume the motion to proceed S-744, the comprehensive immigration legislation, which, Mr. President, you have done a masterful job of getting us to where we are on this matter. The time, as Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the time until 1:30 will be for debate on the motion to proceed. Mr. President, I have been told that we need a little extra time. So what we will do is extend that time until 2 o'clock. So I ask consent that the prior order that's in effect be extended until 2 o'clock and that the extra half hour be divided between the majority and the minority, each getting 15 minutes.
Without objection, so ordered.
And then I ask unanimous consent that I be recognized at 2 p.m.
Without objection, so ordered.
So there'll be no roll call votes today. The next roll call vote will be Monday at 5:30 p.m. on passage of the Farm Bill. Mr. President, today's senators will have the opportunity to debate the bipartisan, immigration bill reported by your committee, the Presiding Officer's Committee, last month. As I've already done once today, I do it again. I commend the chairman of that committee, Senator Leahy, for leading a thorough and transparent process in the committee. I thank Senator Sessions for working with us yesterday to move forward on this measure as quickly as possible. As I've said before, Senator Sessions and I once in a while disagree on substance, but we've always had a friendly relationship, which I appreciate. I applaud the efforts of the Gang of Eight, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, who set aside partisanship to address a critical issue facing our nation, immigration. Our system's broken and needs to be fixed. It's gratifying to see the momentum behind this package of common-sense reforms, which will make our country safer and help 11 million undocumented immigrants get right with the law. Mr. President, I had a number of meetings over the last few days with pollsters taking a look at this legislation, and they all acknowledge that the vast majority of American people want us to move forward on this. Democrats, independents, and Republicans, recognizing the system's broken and needs to be fixed. And, Mr. President, they all agree on a pathway to citizenship. And I have committed to as open as possible process for amendments. I don't want to say totally open, because sometimes with the procedures we have here, as with the Farm Bill, people throw monkey wrenches into things here and we're not able to do as we wanted to do. But we'll wrap this legislation up before the July 4th recess. I hope senators will take advantage of today's time for debate. I look forward to a thorough and thoughtful discussion and deliberation of this legislation in the days ahead. Would the Chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S744, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 80 S744, a bill to provide for comprehensive immigration reform and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the time until 2 p.m. will be divided, with the senator from Alabama, Mr. Sessions, or his designee, controlling 3 hours and 15 minutes, and the majority leader or his designee controlling the remaining time.
And Mr. President,
Senator from Vermont.
I see my friend Alabama on the floor. I ask consent to just continue for 1 minute as separate. Mr. President, I just wanted to thank the majority leader for his kind comments, but I should also note that throughout the markup and debate on the immigration bill, his advice and his counsel was always there. We discussed it many, many times, and I appreciate the fact that he made it very clear the bill would come up at the time he said, and we would not have it here without his strong support. So I appreciate Senator Reid's very nice comments this morning. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, this is important legislation, the immigration bill, and I was able to have a discussion with Senator Reid yesterday, and he was moving forward to the motion to proceed to the bill, which requires considerable debate, and I asked for and insisted on the opportunity to have some time today to talk about it, and he agreed to that. So I think that was a good step, and I thank him for that agreement. And we just got a lot to talk about. And the matters are complex and important, and I would urge my colleagues to begin to pay real attention to the legislation. This is the bill as printed, front and back page of each page. It was reportedly going to be 1,000 pages. Now, colleagues were proud. They said it was 800, but more has been added to it, so it's now back over 1,000 pages again. It's very complex in certain key points, making multiple references to other code sections that are in existing law. Therefore, it's very difficult to read. It takes a considerable amount of time, and I don't even suspect that the Gang of Eight has had the time to read and digest and understand fully what's in the legislation. We are a nation of immigrants. The people that I know that are concerned about this legislation in Congress are not against immigration. I certainly am not. We admit about 1 million people a year legally into our country. That's a substantial number by any standards. Indeed, it's the highest of any country in the world. It's important that we execute that policy in an effective way. It impacts our whole nation. Immigration has enriched our culture. It's boosted our economy. And we've had tremendously wonderful people who've come here, people who've contributed to our arts, to our business and economy, to science and sports. We've just had a good time, a good run with immigration in a lot of ways. But we need to ask ourselves at this point in time, is it working within limits? Are the American people happy with what we're doing? And are we moving in the right direction? We know that our generous policies have resulted in a substantial flow of people into the country. And our challenge today is to create a lawful system of immigration that serves the national interest and admits those people into our country who are most likely to be successful, most likely to prosper, most likely to flourish, therefore most likely to be beneficial to America. Surely we can agree that that is a good policy. And it's not been our policy, really, prior to this. We have both the enormous illegal flow of people into the country, as well as a legal flow that is not evaluated in a way that other advanced nations do when they execute their policies of immigration. For example, like Canada. So we should establish smart rules for admittance, rules that benefit America, and rules that must be enforced, that must be lawful. We can't reject a dutiful, good person to America and then turn around and allow someone else who came in illegally to benefit from breaking our laws, to the disadvantage of the good person who, when told no, had to accept that answer. It's just the way we are. So establishing these smart rules for admittance, rules that benefit America, and these rules have to be rules that are enforced. It just has to be, and that's not happening today. So the current policies that we have are not serving our country well. Therefore, an immigration system, a reformed immigration system, should spend some time in depth in public analysis of how and what we should consider as we decide who should be admitted. Because we can't admit everybody. And then when that's done, we need to create a system that we can expect to actually work to enforce the standards that we have. So I really believe we can make tremendous progress, and we can fix this system. It needs to be fixed. The legislation that's been offered by the Gang of Eight says they've fixed it. Don't worry. We've taken care of all that is needed. You've got a plan that will be compassionate to people who've been here, and we've got a plan that will work in the future and end the illegality. Well, it won't do that. That's the problem. It will definitely give amnesty today. It will definitely give immediate legal status to some 11 million people today, but the promises of enforcement in the future, the promises that the legislation will focus on a way that enhances the success rate of people who come to America, is not fulfilled in the legislation. You just have to read the bill and see what's in it. I wish it were different. And we'll talk about in the days and weeks to come what's in the bill and why it fails. And I can share with you how it is that we came to have such a flawed bill before us. And we need to understand that as we go forward. So I'm amazed that the Gang of Eight has sent such legislation forward to it. how aggressively they defended it in the Judiciary Committee. We did have a markup in Judiciary Committee. We were allowed to offer amendments and had some debate there. But it was an odd thing, and repeatedly members, not even in the Gang of Eight, would say, I like this amendment, but I can't vote for it because I understand it upsets the deal. So we need to ask ourselves, who made the deal? Whose deal is this? And how is it that the deal is such that members of the United States Senate who agree with an amendment say they must vote against the amendment because it upsets some deal? Who was in this room? Who was in the deal-making process? So I think that was a revealing time in the committee. They had agreed, stated openly, there would be no substantial changes in the agreements that the Gang of Eight had made, and they would stick together and vote against any changes, and that they did except minor changes. There were a number of amendments accepted, a number of Republican amendments accepted. Many of those were second agreed or altered by the majority in the committee, but none of those fundamentally altered the framework and the substance of this legislation. I don't think that's disputable, and we'll talk about that. This is the problem that we are working with. So how did the legislation become as defective as it is? I contend, I think it's quite plain, it was because it was not written by independent members of the Senate in a more open process, but was written by special interest, and would like to share some thoughts on that subject right now, because I think it goes to the heart of the difficulties that we have. There were continual meetings over a period of quite a number of months that got this bill off to the wrong track in the beginning. Powerful groups met, excluding the interests of the American people, excluding the law enforcement community. Throughout the bill, you can see the influence that these groups had on the drafting of it. Some of the groups actually did the drafting. A lot of the language clearly came from the special interest groups that were engaged in these secret negotiations. And they, of course, what is a special interest group? A special interest group is a group of people that have a commitment, an interest that they want to advance, but they don't pretend to share the national interest. So they have to, maybe it's a legitimate special interest, maybe it's not a legitimate special interest, but they have a special interest, a particular interest that they want to advance. So this is what happened. Big labor and big business were active in drafting this legislation, with the entire deal obviously hanging on, it was reported, their negotiations. For example, Wall Street Journal, March 10th, the headline, "Competing Interests Abound." Quote, "The Chamber of Commerce and businesses it represents are locked in negotiations with the AFL-CIO about workers in industries like hospitality and landscaping. Meanwhile, farm worker unions have been quietly negotiating with Growers Association about how to revamp short-term visas for agricultural workers. And senators on both sides of the aisle are weighing in to ensure their state industries are protected." The Washington Post, March 10th. "Hush-hush meetings for Gang of Eight senators as they work on sweeping immigration legislation." The article reads, "They're struggling on the question of legal immigration and future workers and are trading proposals with leaders of the AFL-CIO, the Chamber of Commerce, to try to get a deal," close quote. Try to get a deal. They're working on a deal. How about this? Roll call, March 21st. Quote, talks led by the Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO over a new guest worker program for lower-skilled immigrants are stalled, prompting members of the bipartisan group of 8 senators to get personally involved to try to nudge the negotiations on to resolution. So the senators were not in there discussing. So the senators, when it got to be tough and things weren't moving along, they come in to try to egg it on to get the agreement. And what is agreement? Between the unions and the big business. Who's representing the American worker effectively? New York Times, March 30th. Quote, the nation's top business and labor groups have reached an agreement on a guest worker program for low-skilled immigrants, a person with knowledge of the negotiations said. Senator Schumer convened a conference call on Friday night with Thomas J. Donahue, the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, the nation's main federation of labor unions, in which they agreed in principle on a guest worker program for low-skilled, year-round temporary workers. And we know that there was one group not included in these talks, and that is the group that is given the duty to enforce the laws involved in immigration. The National ICE Union, the Customs and Enforcement Organization, pleaded with the Gang of Eight. They urged the Gang of Eight. They wrote letters to the Gang of Eight. I sent information to the Gang of Eight, asking them to consult with the officers who have the duty to enforce this law, but to no avail. They were shut out of every meeting and never really been consulted. So it's interesting to note, however, that others weren't shut out of the meetings. They weren't left out of the room. Washington Post, April 15th. While Obama, quote, while Obama has allowed Senate negotiators to work on a compromise that can win approval, a White House staff member attends each staff-level meeting to monitor progress and assist with the technical aspects of writing the bill. So there's been an attempt to suggest that this is purely a congressional action, that the White House is just sort of hands-off. But we know the White House is deeply involved in this and approving every aspect or disapproving aspects they don't approve of. And the question is, who is influencing this? Who is influencing the White House? President Obama. The Daily Caller on February 6th notes this, quote, on February 5th, Obama held a White House meeting with a series of industry leaders, progressive advocates, ethnic lobbies, including La Raza, to boost support for his plan that would provide a conditional amnesty to 11 million illegal aliens, allow new immigrants to get residency for their relatives and elderly parents, and also establish rules for a future flow of skilled and unskilled workers. The invitees included the CEO of Goldman Sachs, Motorola, Marriott, and Deloitte, close quote. So they're in the meeting, apparently. Also, we know that participating in a lot of these discussions was the American Immigration Lawyers Association. This group obviously was involved in writing it, and I have to tell you, they will be the biggest winners of this legislation. Time and again, rules that were fairly clear today and probably should have been made clearer are muddled, provisions are placed in that will create litigation and encourage lawsuits, delays, and costs. For example, hardship is being given as an exemption in many cases, exemptions for family problems and other kind of things of that nature. Well, when ICE or it says you should be deported, then the deportee has the ability to say, well, I've got a hardship. My mother is here. Or I have a brother that's sick. Or I need this or that. And what does hardship mean? It means a trial is what it means. So the Immigration Lawyers Association was substantially involved in the meetings. Politico on March 19th said, in a bid to capitalize on the shared interest in immigration reform, a budget deal, and new trade pacts, the White House has launched a charm offensive toward corporate America since the November election, hosting more than a dozen conference calls with top industry officials, which have not previously been disclosed, along with a flurry of meetings at the White House. I'm continuing to quote, participants on the recent calls include the heads of Goldman Sachs, Business Roundtable, Evercore, Silver Lake, Centerbridge Partners, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as well as the heads of Washington trade groups representing the banking industry, such as Financial Services and Roundtable. And they've been involved in these discussions. Even foreign countries have had a say in drafting our law. The Hill on February 7th reported, quote, Mexico's new ambassador to the United States, Eduardo Medina Mora, has had a number of meetings with the administration where the issue of immigration has come up since he took office last month, said a Mexican official familiar with the process. He is expected to meet with lawmakers shortly as legislation begins to take form. Probably like no other country, we are a player on this particular issue, the source said, close quote. Well, the law officers weren't in the room. We know that. People who questioned economically the size and scope and nature of our immigration system weren't in the room. So in case anyone doubts the role of special interest in drafting the legislation, pay attention to this quote by Frank Sherry, Executive Director of the liberal pro-amnesty group America's Voice, in the Wall Street Journal, April 17th. Quote, the triggers are based on developing plans and spending money, not on reaching that effectiveness, which is really quite clever, close quote. In other words, the sponsors of the bill were telling everyone that they had triggers in the bill that would guarantee enforcement of laws in the future about immigration flow into America, and that if enforcement didn't occur, the triggers would stop people from being legalized and end the process. Well, that's not so. We've studied the language, and we know the triggers are ineffectual and are not significant and won't work. And that will be explained in the days to come. And Mr. Sherry acknowledges it. He said that was really clever to have these faux triggers, these triggers that won't work, because we can tell everybody that don't worry, the legality won't occur if the enforcement doesn't occur. But in clever ways, they drafted a bill that won't work. They'll say it works, but won't work. Again, with all the slush funds in this bill, and there are a number of them that go to private activist groups, community action groups, it's easy to see who had special interest at the table. The National Review on May 29th reported, quote, a number of immigration activist groups, such as the National Council of La Raza, would be eligible to receive millions in taxpayer funding to advise illegal immigrants applying for legal status under the bill, close quote. So money will go to these activist groups like La Raza, who's basically advocated not enforcing our laws. So La Raza's in the meetings. La Raza's an open advocate for not enforcing laws involving illegal immigration. They are there participating. They're going to get money out of the deal with some of the grant programs, while the law officers who have the ability to tell the committee, the Gang of Eight, how to make the system work are shut out of the process. Prosecutors, were they involved in the process? No, they've not been. The National Immigration Forum, a pro-immigrant group, have been involved in some of these discussions. So some people have said that the bill had to be drafted in secret. but that the markup process in the Judiciary Committee would be open and transparent. But that is only partially so. We did have a markup. We were allowed, those who had objections to the bill, to offer amendments, as did those who support the bill, had the opportunity to talk and offer amendments. But at every turn in the committee, the members of the Gang of Eight expressed support on occasions for certain amendments, but only to vote against the amendment. Due, they said, to the agreement they had to vote together and against significant amendments, regardless of their personal feelings. The gang influenced other members on the committee to do the same. Huffington Post, April 16th headline, quote, Senate Immigration Group turns to keeping fragile agreement intact, close quote. It goes on to quote Senator McCain as saying, quote, we will pledge to oppose, all 8 of us, provisions that would destroy the fragile agreement that we have. So they've got an agreement. They've got an agreement with the unions and the big business and the agribusinesses and the food processors and La Raza and the immigration lawyers. They got an agreement with them. And they're going to defend it even though they acknowledge amendments that were offered would improve the bill. Now, this is no way to serve the national interest, in my view. In discussing an amendment that would require workers to make a good faith effort to hire American workers first, Senator Whitehouse said this. This is what happened in the committee. Quote, I'm in a position which I'm being informed that this would be a deal breaker to the deal. I frankly don't see how that could be the case, but I'm not privy to that understanding, and so I'm going to vote in support of the agreement that's been reached, close quote. In other words, Senator Whitehouse says, well, I don't understand this. I'd like to vote the other way, but I'm told you've got a deal and that this would damage the deal, and so I can't vote for it. He wasn't even in the Gang of Eight, but went along with that. Related to that same amendment, Senator Franken echoed the remarks, saying, quote, I really just want to associate myself with Senator Whitehouse's remarks. He goes on to say, I don't want to be a deal breaker. In discussing an amendment that would increase family-based immigration, Senator Feinstein noted, quote, I think it's been a unique process because those people who are members of a group that put this together have stood together and have voted against amendments that they felt would be a violation of the bipartisan agreement that brought both sides together. And I'm not sure that's always good. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, to set public policy in America. To have some secret agreement reached with a group of people we hardly know who they are, trump the ability to do the right thing for the American people. So I just want to say that is what's happened here. And the point to make is, and what I think our colleagues need to understand and the American people need to understand, in reality, the special interests, La Raza, the unions, the corporate world, the big agriculture businesses, the food processors, they are the ones that made the agreement in this process. And the senators just sort of ratified it, and they can't agree to a change because they promised these special interest groups things. So if La Raza would accept point A that somebody wanted accepted, and the unions say would accept point B, then they would both agree that I'll do A if you'll do B. And then the bill gets to the floor and somebody says A is wrong, and we should not put that in the bill. Let's change that. Oh, no, we can't agree, but we've got an agreement. Agreement with who? La Raza, the agribusinesses, the Chamber of Commerce, Microsoft, Zuckerberg. That's what happened here. I'm just telling you. And the people who drafted this bill, the people who've advocated these special interests, we shouldn't be surprised. Businesses, groups, organizations have special interests. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. What's wrong is that members of Congress, members of the United States Senate, need to be representing the national interest, the people's interest, the workers' interest in America. That's what we need to be doing, not the special interest. And I got to tell you, the openness of this is sort of breathtaking to me. Who is protecting the national interest? Did they have any of the top-ranked economists in this country being asked what would be the right number of low-skilled workers to bring into America? Did they have any of the top experts say, how much advanced science degrees can we have? How many of our college graduates are unemployed? What's the right number? None of this was apparently discussed by our colleagues who allowed this process to go. So I would say, finally, with regard to the special interest, they have no interest, virtually none of them that were involved in this process, of guaranteeing in the future that we don't have illegality. See, that's the failure here. They don't have any interest in that. And therefore, there was no intensity of interest in that aspect of the legislation. Oh, there was a lot of interest in how many computer people could be admitted, or how many agriculture workers, or how many low-skilled factory workers or construction workers or other workers. They all worried about that. I mean, they fought over that. That's what these negotiations were about. And their internal discussions and disagreements. But nobody was investing any time or interest in the second phase of this. If you have an amnesty, if you have a legality of millions of people that came here illegally, what are we going to do to ensure it doesn't happen in the future? See, I was a federal prosecutor. I personally tried an immigration case myself. I bet nobody else here can say that. But so I'm aware that you've got to have certain legal processes and certain investments in investigative and enforcement mechanisms to make the system work in the future. And so as we go forward with this debate, we're going to show, and it's going to be clear, that this has not been fixed. And in fact, the standards of current law with regard to what ought to be done, requirements in current federal law are being weakened, some of them eviscerated by this bill. This bill is far weaker, Mr. President, than the 2007 legislation. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Well, that will be clear when we get through here. That was rejected by the American people, the 2007 agreement. And it actually weakens current law in quite a number of significant areas, weakens current law, while we're being told, don't worry, this is the toughest bill ever. So if I'm mistaken, I'm sure we will hear about that as we discuss it. This is a great democracy we're part of, and I'm expressing my view. But I spent some time on these issues. I was involved with it in 2006 and 2007. I'm a federal prosecutor. I've done this over the years. I know how our ICE agents work, our Border Patrol agents work, our Customs and Immigration Service people work. I've worked with them. I've tried cases for them. I know them personally. They've been left out of this process. The ICE union has voted no confidence in John Morton, their supervisor. What a dramatic event. I'm not aware of that ever happening. In my 14 years plus as a federal prosecutor, actual employment union declaring that their supervisor is, they have no confidence in him. And what did they say? They said he spends all his time advocating for amnesty and not enforcing the laws. He's directing us to not follow legal requirements that we took an oath to follow. And get this, the ICE officers have filed a lawsuit in federal court attacking Secretary Napolitano, at least her conduct of her office, and they have asserted that she's not above the law. She is not authorized to direct them not to follow plain requirements of federal law. And the federal judge initially seemed to have accepted the validity of the lawsuit. I've never heard of that before. This is really an incredible event. Nobody's even talking about it. So it's been the position of this administration, everybody has to know, to see that the laws not be effectively enforced, particularly in the interior of America. And that has basically been, some even acknowledge a de facto amnesty, because if you're directing your law officers not to do their duty, you've basically eliminated the law. And the administration shouldn't be doing that. Congress has refused to change these laws time and again. If anything, they've sometimes increased them, strengthened them, and now we've got our agents blocked from doing it. And the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, who deals with the visas, who deals with the application for citizenship, CIS is Citizenship and Immigration Service. They deal with the citizenship processes and the paperwork and all of that. They have written in opposition to this legislation. So first, the ICE officers, Chris Crane, the head of that group, has written a powerful letter in detail condemning this legislation, saying it will not work, it will make matters worse, and it will endanger national security. And the Customs and Immigration, Citizenship and Immigration Service group that deals with the paperwork and the citizenship processing and the visa work and a lot of that, they have likewise written saying this bill will not work, and they oppose it. Well, I just got to say, somebody needs to be thinking about what's going on here. Right. The amnesty, done. The promise of enforcement, the toughest bill ever in the future, no, sir. Not there, not close. That's why we have a problem. I can't understand it, really, why people wouldn't want the legal system to be complete, to be effective, and would be followed, so we as Americans could be proud of it. Well, you know, there's a lot of power behind this legislation. I can feel it. When I raise questions, pushback comes. You're not politically correct. You're unkind. You don't like immigrants. And that's offensive to me. I believe in immigration. We've got 1 million people that come in here every year legally. I don't oppose that. I don't oppose doing something responsible and compassionate for the people who've been here a long time illegally. We've got to be careful about it, but we can do that. But the American people are so right on their basic instinct about this matter. I was just have to say how I believe the American people's heart and souls are good about immigration. A lot of people think, well, we have to meet in secret and we have to run this bill through as fast as possible because we don't want American people to find out about it because they don't like immigrants. Not so. A recent poll revealed something very important, and our members of this body and the House need to note. It said, if you're angry about the way things are going with regard to immigration, are you angry at people who came into the country illegally, or are you angry at the government officials for allowing it to happen? 12% said they were angry at the people that entered illegally. 88% said they were angry at public officials for not creating a legal system that will work. Now, isn't that doesn't that speak well of the American people? You could be angry about somebody who came into our country violating the law. And what I think American people understand that people want to come here, and it's our duty to stop it. And they've been pleading with Congress for over 30 years to do something about it, to create a lawful system, to end the lawlessness, to do the right thing, to create immigration processes that we can be proud of, like Canada has and other countries around the world have. So we believe in immigration. We want to do the right thing, but it needs to be lawful. We have more applicants for admission into America than we can possibly accept. I was in I believe, Peru with Senator Specter a number of years ago, and a poll was called to our attention from Nicaragua that said 60% of the people in Nicaragua said they would come to America if they could. 60%. And then the ambassador in Peru told us, he said, they had a poll around here that said 70%. Well, so you just can't, everybody can't come to America. We're not able to assimilate or absorb, and we all know that. We all agree on that. And so therefore you set rules and processes that we can be proud of, that are fair and objective, and that people who want to come meet those standards and they wait their turn and they come lawfully. But we've had from this administration and prior administration, President Bush also, too little interest in seeing that the law is enforced. And we've got loopholes in our laws and processes that need to be fixed. And we can do that with a good immigration bill. But this one doesn't get us there. So we have my friend, I noticed, did an op-ed yesterday, Karl Rove, who was President Bush's political advisor and a man of great talents, and I knew him back to the day we were in college together. And he quotes a lot of polls that say the American people are willing to accept legal processes and status for people in this country. And I acknowledge that. They are. But he does not quote the polls that say overwhelmingly that they want the illegality ended first. They want border security first. Because they're smart enough to know. They're smart enough to know if you don't get the border security now, you may never get it. In fact, want to get it because history tells us so. He didn't quote a recent poll. I see Rasmussen, the so-called, this is what was in the Rasmussen polling report. The so-called Gang of Eight proposal in the Senate legalizes the status of immigrants first and promises to secure the border later. By a 4-to-1 margin, people want that process reversed. So my good friend Karl Rove didn't quote that. Additionally, while voters think highly of immigrants, which speaks well of us as American people, they don't trust the government. And that skepticism is growing. In January, 45% thought it was at least somewhat likely that the federal government would work to secure the border and prevent future illegal immigration. Today, only 30% has that confidence. Why? Because they're beginning to learn that this bill doesn't do what they were told it was going to do. The growing awareness of the border control issue has led to other shifts in public opinion as well. Early in the year, Democrats were trusted more than Republicans on the issue of immigration. Now that's switched. Well, we're not interested in politics. We're interested in doing the right thing. When we do the right thing, the people will affirm us. So Mr. Rove, he goes on to say, now don't say amnesty. My friend Carl said, don't say amnesty. That's a bad thing for you to say. Well, let me just say, under the legislation, that's before us now, we would have a circumstance immediately when people are given legal status. They'll be able to get any job, and they're here safe and sound unless they get arrested for a felony or something very serious like that. And they put on a path that guarantees them the ability to go all the way to citizenship. And Mr. Rove says they have to pay a $1,000 fine over 6 years. What is that? $170 a year? $15, $12 a month? So this is the punishment. So you pay $12 a month worth of fines. That allows you to not have to go home even though you entered the country illegally, didn't wait your term, and you're guaranteed to pass to citizenship. And then at the end, you have to pay another $1,000, some 10, 13 years later. So so this is the punishment that's in the legislation. But the people who came illegally get exactly what they wanted immediately, which is to stay here, ability to work here. They'll get a Social Security card, and they'll get a ability to go to any job in the country. They have an ID that will allow them to do that. So they'll be able to compete with any job in America. They'll be able to compete for the jobs of our husbands and sons and daughters and grandchildren might be competing for out there. 11 million would be in that position. So I don't think my friend Carl is making a very strong point there that this is some sort of punishment. And he says they must pay taxes. Well, hallelujah. Shouldn't you pay taxes? And they're, in quote, they are, quote, barred from receiving any federal benefits, including welfare and Obamacare, close quote. That's a flat statement, and it's flat wrong. The first group, the DREAM Act group, will be some 2.5 million, maybe 3 million. They will be citizens in 5 years and will get any of the federal welfare programs in 5 years. Many of the ag workers will be in that position in 10 years. And immediately any workers who qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit can get that immediately. Now, other provisions are put off for 10, 13 years, and that makes the cost score look better. But over the long term, once the group is given legal status and citizenship, they will then qualify for every program. And since the overwhelming number of the workers here today are lower skilled that are illegal, they are lower skilled, and you can expect their incomes to be low, they'll qualify for Earned Income Tax Credit, for Medicaid and program after program, food stamps and others. And the score goes up tremendously in the out years. The Heritage Foundation is the only group that's done an in-depth analysis, and they say over the lifetime of the people that are here illegally, if they are legalized under this bill, it would add $6.3 trillion to the deficit of the United States, because that's a lot of money. That's almost as much as the unfunded liabilities of Social Security, which is about $7 trillion. So this would be $6 trillion. Some would say that number is too high, but I haven't seen anybody say that number isn't in the ballpark, and nobody else has done a study to refute it, and it's going to be trillions of dollars in the out years. But, and it's not true. There'll be no government benefits to people who are in the country who get legalized under this. It's just not so. Well, and this isn't a point to me. It's just sort of a fundamental point, and it sounds so good when you have a political guru like my friend Carl. He says, to renew their temporary status after 6 years, those waiting to become citizens must prove they've been steadily employed, paid all taxes, and aren't on welfare. So let's take what's happened. So we've got an individual that's been in the country 3 years. They get the provisional legal status immediately when this bill passes. And in 6 years, they have to have, we're told, to show they're steadily employed, paid taxes, and aren't on welfare. Well, who's going to investigate that first? Number one. And so they've already been here 3 years. As long as they came before December 31st, 2011, they're given legal status. Whether they have a job or not, no matter what, they're given this legal status. Without a family, have no roots in America other than having been here, they claim, before December 31st, 2011. But we're not willing to deport them. We're not willing to deport them. So now, 6 years later, they worked intermittently and they're unemployed and we've got a recession and we don't have enough jobs for people. We're going to send out the feds and uproot them, and their children are now in junior and high school, and send them back home? Give me a break. That is one of the most bogus claims ever. That won't be enforced, and there are waiver authorities in the bill, so waivers will be issued. Nobody's going out to enforce this, so I'm just tired of them saying it. They shouldn't even say it, to try to get the American people to believe that we're going to actually go out and deport what could be millions of people who are out of work in 5 or 6, the 6-year period when they have to reestablish themselves. That just bothers me. And they say these individuals, Karl Rove said, quote, must stand at the back of the line behind everyone who's waiting patiently and legally to immigrate here, close quote. Now, that's not so. Give me a break. These people are here illegally now. They do not want to be deported, which is understandable. They're going to be given status, permanent status, a Social Security number, and a right to work anywhere in America. And they're not ahead of somebody in Honduras waiting in line to come here? Not ahead of somebody in China or Indonesia or Italy or Spain? Of course they're ahead of them. They're not waiting. So I'm without words to express my concern about that. We need to be accurate about what the legislation says here. Mike, well, I'll yield when he comes. And so what about this amnesty? Well, people say you shouldn't call it amnesty. Well, I think that's a legitimate word. The legislation right here before us would immediately give legal status, allow people to move to legal permanent residence and citizenship later. And they have to pay a few $1,000s in fine. Well, I think that's amnesty, in my opinion. Somebody can say, well, they pay a $1,000 fine. They paid a penalty, therefore you can't call it amnesty. I don't think so. I mean, this legislation basically says everybody here is given legal status and put on a guaranteed path to citizenship. Just don't get convicted of a felony. So I really don't think that's a good argument. So that was contended a bit, but I think the sponsors kind of gave up objecting back in 2007 when the legislation was before us at that time. But I would just note that in 2007, the initial fine that people paid had to be paid initially $3,000. Under this bill, you pay $1,000 over 6 years. Then to get a green card, the legal permanent residence, you had to pay an additional $4,000. And an interim review period calls for a fine or payment of $1,500, totaling $8,500. So in 2007, the payments required for somebody to move forward to citizenship was at least $8,500. This bill is $2,000, and really $1,000 to get to be able to stay here and work here, and that is payments are stretched over time. So I just would have to say it's difficult for me to accept that this is people are earning their citizenship and they're paying a price for it. Then Mr. Rowe mentions they have to pay their taxes. But one of our Washington publications, Politico, did an article about that June 3rd and said, with regard to tax payment, quote, "After all, it was one of the Gang of Eight's main talking points when it unveiled the immigration blueprint in January. Sponsors vowed that their proposal would include a back tax requirement to ward off critics' claims that the bill would be amnesty. Citizenship would come at a price, they said. But the gang has all but dropped that talking point. The immigration legislation currently moving through the Senate includes a scaled-back provision that relies almost entirely on the immigrants coming forward to the Internal Revenue Service voluntarily. Critics call it toothless," close quote. It is toothless. There's no back tax. My friend Karl Rove still out here spinning, claiming you got some great advantage. We're going to collect all these back taxes. Nobody's going to investigate these cases, even if the law was clear. We don't have the we don't have the money and the ability to do so, and it's not going to happen. And that's just the fact. And let's talk about in general some of the other issues that will come before us. I know my colleague Senator Lee will be joining us on the floor in a little bit, and I'll yield to him if and when he comes. But I wanted to talk about these promises that we were given by the people who wrote the bill. Promised that the path to citizenship would be, quote, contingent upon securing our borders and tracking whether illegal immigrants have left the country when required. Now that is needed. That is fundamentally correct. That was the promise. I'm quoting that. That's one of the Gang of Eight principles that they published. Our bill, they say, does that. I wish that were so. Quote, a path to citizenship would be, quote, contingent upon securing our borders and tracking whether legal immigrants have left the country when required. But in truth, the bill is amnesty first and a promise of enforcement later. And with regard to tracking immigrants who left the country when they're required to, it devastates and weakens current law. So that can never happen effectively. It's unbelievable to me that they would pass a bill that directly contradicts current law. On Meet the Press not too long ago, Senator Schumer, one of the Gang of Eight, said it flat out. He acknowledged that the promise of enforcement first is not going to happen. He said, quote, first, people will be legalized. Then we'll make sure the border is secure, close quote. So instead of enforcement first, it's legalization first. That's plain as day. It's not even disputed any longer. The illegal immigrants will be legalized immediately, and not a single border or interior enforcement measure has to be in place then or ever. And what all the Secretary Napolitano needs to do is submit 2 reports to Congress. Illegal immigrants will then begin receiving legal status, work permits, Social Security accounts, driver's licenses, travel documents, and other state benefits, financial benefits that come from the states. Nothing requires that any border security be in place, any fence be built before this amnesty is ever accomplished. Now, we were told we were going to have a trigger, and until the fences were built, until other enforcement mechanisms were undertaken, until that happened, you weren't going to have amnesty. But it's not so. All the Secretary needs to do is submit a report. And she's already said we've got better enforcement than ever in history, and indicated she does not believe we need more fencing. So the contention from the Gang of Eight that we're going to have a major building of fencing at the border has not been proven out. And then Frank Sherry, the head of the pro-amnesty group, as I noted, he said, quote, the triggers are based on developing plans. She's supposed to develop a plan, the Secretary of Homeland Security. So he says, quote, the triggers are based on developing plans and spending money, not on a reaching that effectiveness, which is really quite clever, close quote, he said. So what Mr. Sherry is saying is, first, he kind of let the cat out of the bag. So it's a faux trigger. It's a parent trigger that's not real. And he said it was really quite clever. And indeed it is. But it's now becoming clear that that's not been, that what's been promised is not happening. So you could say to the American people, don't be taken in on this. We can see it now. Make your voices heard. Follow this debate. And if the promises for this bill are not followed, then let your voice be heard in Congress. Tell your congressman you're not happy. Tell your senator you've got to do better. Because the whole gist of this, the whole crux of this is to, if we have an amnesty, if we have a very generous, compassionate treatment of people who violated our laws and come here, shouldn't we have a policy that ends the illegality in the future? That's what the American people have demanded for 30 years. They are good and decent. That is an absolutely proper thing for them to demand of Congress, and we're not doing it. And it's heartbreaking to me that we're here going through this process with a bill as flawed as this one. And as time goes by, we will talk more about it. I see my friend, the Senator from Utah, Senator Lee, who's a fabulous new addition to the Senate Judiciary Committee, where this legislation moved. He contributed in many, many able ways to the discussion, offering excellent amendments, a skilled lawyer, and a man who is deeply committed to the principles of law, and it made our country great. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, today I rise in favor of immigration reform. The current immigration system is a travesty. It's inefficient, it's uncompassionate,